Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, I received 4 flat tires from a stranger, so I changed their neighborhood dynamics. I was invited to play poker at a friend's house. I'd never met the host and never been there before, but I knew most the people. The house was only 15-minute walk or 2-minute drive from my place, but I'd never been on that cul-de-sac before. At about 3 o'clock in the morning, the last of us poured out of the house and into our cars. I felt something was off the moment I sat in my little car, but it didn't register. I was very tired. Everyone else left and the host house went dark as I let my car warm up. It was very cold outside. When I tried to pull away, I knew something was wrong. My car wasn't moving normally. Having hardly moved from my spot, I stopped and stepped out of my car. That's when I noticed I was too close to the ground. By the moonlight, I could see all my tires were flattened. My car was sitting on the ground. I sat back inside my car to collect my thoughts and keep warm. That's when I noticed writing in the dew in my rear window. It read, "Duck you." I got out and stood over my rear window, reading it in disbelief. I looked around my car for other evidence but found none. The cul-de-sac was mostly empty but had been full when all the poker players were there. I reasoned it was a resident who thought they owned the road and didn't like us taking up their spots. This was a Saturday night. We all showed up around 9 o'clock in the evening. Now it's 3:20 in the morning. It's a public dead-end road. Not wanting to leave my car in this place where it had been vandalized, I drove ever so slowly on flat tires back to my place and parked in my spot. When I got out again, I saw the tires were destroyed from driving on them. It's possible the perps only let the air out the valves. If that was the case, I had finished the job of completely destroying them and costing myself hundreds to replace them. After a rest at home, I resolved I could not live with this offense, and I reasoned the perp must have been the home I had parked in front of. So I grabbed a pocket knife and hiked back to that neighborhood. At the house I'd been parked in front of, there were 3 vehicles in the driveway. A car, then a pickup truck that looked like a dirty, well-used work vehicle, then another car that looked like it didn't move. Starting with the pickup truck, I used my pocket knife to flatten all 4 tires and then the car in front of it. I walked off quickly. I never had a reason to return to that particular piece of road again. Fast forward a week later, I see my friend who rented room at the poker house. I asked about parking on his cul-de-sac. He revealed there were neighbors across the road who battled over parking. He said they went at it fairly often over the previous year. Fast forward 2 months later, still. I see my friend and again ask about parking on his road. This time he wants to know why. So I tell him the above story. He says, "Oh, that's why." I asked what happened. He said the street has been silent and there hasn't been any fighting for parking in a couple months. A year later, my friend said that night must have been the end of it, as he'd never seen or heard fighting again. The next one is titled, "That's Not Your Car, Lady." So this happened around 2008. My buddy Brock had gotten out of the military after 10 years. He'd started in the Marines but transitioned into the Army for the last 4 years before buying a house in Texas. When he got out, he did a variety of jobs before landing a gig with a repo service. He worked there for a year and had a lot of wild stories, but this one sticks out the most as he helped a fellow soldier get revenge on an evil ex. Brock was at the office speaking with his manager, whom I'll refer to as Karen. Now, this particular Karen had a lot of Karen-like qualities but was a force for good, if you can believe that. While they were talking, they see a young man enter the office. They immediately noticed he had 2 black eyes and an arm was in a sling. The young man, whose name I unfortunately never learned but I'll call Ben, asked how hard it would be for them to help repossess his car. Karen called her daughter in, Karen Jr., and had her pour Ben a cup of coffee. Karen then asked Ben to tell her a story. Ben began with telling her that he had just returned from a deployment. He had been dating a local girl that lived outside of the famous Fort Hood, not a good idea by the way, before the deployment. Thanks to a previous deployment, he had managed to get himself a used black Dodge Charger, which was his baby. He further explained that shortly after buying the car they went to Morgan's. As they pulled up to Morgan's, he saw a car there that he initially didn't recognize, but as they got closer he realized it was his baby. Morgan had the car painted hot pink and put 24-inch spinners on it. He tried the key just to make sure and the lights flickered as it unlocked. While his buddy laughed, Ben went to the front door and Morgan answered. He asked what happened to his car and she responded, "It's my car now." Ben had met the local girl, who for the sake of the story I'll call Morgan. Morgan was always asking to drive his car but he would always decline. When he was getting ready for his deployment, Morgan repeatedly asked if she could borrow the car but he kept saying no. After much needling he relented, but on the condition that she take care of his apartment until he comes back from rest and relaxation leave. She agreed. Ben left for his deployment while Morgan took care of his place. When Ben came back for leave he found his apartment immaculate. He pulled his car from storage, drove to Morgan's. He spent a few days with her before handing her the keys and heading to his home state to visit family before returning to his deployment. He returned again from his deployment and found nothing but trouble. When he walked into his apartment he found a layer of dust on just about every surface. It was almost like no one had been there in months. When he checked his bedroom he'd found his room had been torn apart, all of his drawers had been searched and upturned. He tried to call Morgan but never received an answer. He located his safe, which was hidden, and found it hadn't been touched. He then grabbed his spare key from the safe, called a buddy of his and away and hopped in his hot pink mess. As he started it, 4 large dudes came out of Morgan's house, one with a baseball bat, and yanked Ben out of his car. They proceeded to beat the crap out of him in the driveway before his friend intervened, pulling his conceal and carry pistol on the group. He then took Ben to the hospital. I'm honestly not sure if the cops were called on this. I'd assume yes, but even then Ben said his friend drove by Morgan's house a handful of times while he was in the hospital at random times and the car was never there. Karen stared at Ben for a bit before asking for the paperwork. Ben handed it to her and Karen had a smile form on her face. She then asked Ben for Morgan's phone number. Ben gave it but wasn't aware of what was about to happen. Karen handed the phone to Karen Jr., who then dialed the number. Karen Jr. then began speaking to Morgan, telling her that they'd met at one of the local clubs and wanted to know if she was down to party that night. Apparently Morgan agreed and the plan was set. Brock parked his tow truck at the club and waited. Sure enough, Morgan showed up with the pink monster, parked it, and went inside with some girlfriends. Brock gave them 5 minutes before he stealthily drove up to the car and hooked it up. As he was pulling out with the pink monster, Morgan walked out of the club. She saw her car in the tow truck and began trying to flag Brock down, but he was already out of there. The next day it was business as usual at the office when Morgan called. She was furious that her car was stolen by them and wanted it back. Karen, using her best customer service voice, told her if she had the registration she could come pick it up. Morgan began screaming louder that she was gonna call the cops, at which point Karen sarcastically told her, "Please do," then hung up on her. As this phone call was going on, Brock happened to look out the window and saw Morgan standing next to a car in a vacant lot, throwing what appeared to be a temper tantrum. After Karen hung up, Brock watched her get in the car on the passenger side. Karen then looked out the window and had Brock verify it was her. She then began to smirk. Karen then proceeded to call the owner of the property Morgan and her friend were occupying. She told the owner about the car and asked if he wanted it towed. The owner okayed it. Brock then drove his truck over to the ladies in the car and introduced himself. They tried to explain that they were waiting for Morgan's boyfriend, but Brock insisted they weren't allowed to park there. They argued and called him every name in the book. Brock then hooked up their car and lifted it partially off the ground, forcing the two to exit the vehicle. They tore into him until he showed them the tow order. While this back and forth was going on, Ben arrived at the office and Morgan saw him walk in. She ran to the office door and Brock proceeded to lower the car. When Brock went back to the office, all hell had broken loose. Morgan apparently tried to snag the keys back from Ben, but he pocketed them. She began to hit him in his hurt arm and warned Ben that she'd call her friends to finish the job if she didn't get her keys back. Karen Jr. had already called the cops at this point, and Brock got in between Ben and Morgan, even telling Morgan to try hitting him to find out what would happen. Morgan then tried to play the pity card and said she only wanted the keys to get her laptop out for school. Karen asked Ben to hand the keys over to Brock so he could grab the laptop. Brock retrieved the laptop from the car, and as he was handing it over, she rushed to aggressively grab it but knocked it from Brock's hands. Completely furious at this point, Morgan accused Brock of dropping the computer on purpose and threatened to sue. The cops then arrived and Morgan began her sob story again, telling the police that they stole her car. The police questioned Karen and Karen gave her casual smirk while asking if they wanted to see the security videos. The police watched and listened as Morgan punched Ben several times and heard the threats she made about sending her friends after him. The police then turned to Morgan, who had turned ghost white at this point. She tried to back her way to the door, but the police stopped her. They proceeded to ask about the car, Ben's injuries, and who she planned on sending after him. She initially denied everything, but they already had evidence on her beating him up. She was arrested and Ben got his car back. After the cops left, Ben admitted he didn't want to be seen in a car that looked like it was advertising Pepto-Bismol and planned on trading it in for a GTO. We later heard through the grapevine that the 4 guys who beat up Ben were arrested. Morgan had ratted them out. Brock had a few more stories, but none of them were nearly as good as this one. Edit: so I've had a few people try to refute this story, and I assure you this story is true. I have no reason to lie to anyone about this. Also, some people are asking how this is considered pro-revenge. While Ben didn't personally get the revenge, Karen was the instrument of Morgan's destruction. She set Morgan up to lose the car after Ben and his friend couldn't locate it on their own. Morgan's fate was more or less her own doing. She believed that she could strong-arm an injured man with multiple witnesses while making threats. Also, while gang activity was fairly high in the Killeen, Texas area, I'm not 100% on if they were connected to any gangs. I just want to throw that last part out there. The next one is titled, Avenge My Father. So, this started when my parents went to buy a new car from their favorite Dodge dealership. The dealership had recently changed hands, but all the salespeople, for the most part, were still there. They got all set up to buy the new car. Had a fantastic deal on the table. Asked to drive the car for the evening. Left their car that they were going to trade in as collateral. Well, they get back the next day and the deal had totally changed. The dealer said something about new deals that day changing the previous deal, so they couldn't honor it. My dad was upset. He stormed out of there screaming and cursing. Fast forward a few years to me and my baby daddy looking for a new car for him. My dad warns us not to go to a redacted dealer. They are scam artists and will not honor their word. Unfortunately, in my town, this guy owns just about every major dealership in a 30-mile radius and all the biggest brands. So, baby daddy wants a Honda. So we just suck it up and drive to the nearest one, which, unfortunately, is a redacted dealer. Things go well at first. The guy is friendly. He lets us test drive. Shows us all the cool features. We finally settle on one with upgraded features that's like $26,000, but it's a holiday sale, so it's down to $22,000. We tell him we want to trade in my Nissan Juke, which is valued at $11,000, but I still owe $10,000. That's where things go downhill. The first offer, they have the audacity to only offer $7,000. I'm like, hard pass. Goodbye. But they are like, wait. What if we pay off your car? Do we have a deal then? And the sales dude sticks out his hand like that will seal the deal. I refused to shake it but accepted to see what they come up with. He comes back having raised the trade into $10,000, but he also raised the price of the car to the original price, so we weren't saving any money in the end. When I pointed that out, he was like, what? No way. Like I was stupid or something. So we left. Because it was some shady business practices. If he had just been honest and upfront with me, we probably would have bought that car. So we did a little research and tried to find a Honda dealership that wasn't a redacted dealer. We found one over an hour away that on Google just said Honda cars of suburb in another state. I do live relatively close to a state line in the USA. When we got there, lo and behold, there's redacted all over the windows and walls. I wanted to leave immediately, but baby daddy didn't want to have wasted the gas, not to mention the babysitter time for our infant daughter, so we stayed. The first thing I said to the sales guy was, "Is this really a redacted dealership? It doesn't say that anywhere on Google." He was like, "Oh yeah, hey, sorry, anyway, what can I do for y'all?" So I said, "We are here to buy a car. This car," I described the car we picked out last time, "any color but red. We are trading in my Duke, won't take less than what I owe on it." So they come at us with the $26,000 price tag, and I'm like, "What the hell, the other dealer did $22,000 and they said nope." So I said, "Fine, buy," but baby daddy said, "No, let's just buy it." So we did. We get to the room with the finance guy, and my dad always taught me to make them throw in gap insurance before I sign anything. So I say, "Okay, fine, we will take this deal if you throw in gap insurance." And I didn't even get the word insurance out of my mouth before this creepy, perfectly white-toothed douchebag finance guy literally sticks his hand in my face and says, "We don't do that," in a loud booming voice. As a woman, I was terrified, but I still managed to squeak out something along the lines of, "That's a lie." Like, honestly, what kind of car dealership doesn't offer gap insurance? Then he goes, "Ma'am, don't question my integrity." At that point I just stopped. Well, since baby daddy was the one buying the car, I just shut up, let him sign his life away, except I wouldn't let him buy any add-on packages from that douchebag, and got up and left when he was done. They kept my car and we drove home in his new one. A couple days later they paid off my Duke. Thanks for the credit score boost. But then they started blowing up our phones. They started sending letters every day. Apparently, one of the things baby daddy signed was a right to buy the Duke. But he didn't have the rights to sell that car. I did. They need me to sign because without my signature they don't have my permission to sell my car. Technically, because I didn't sign that paper, the car is still mine. Their calls and letters have been begging me to come back down to sign, or to go out of my way on one of my days off or on a lunch break to find and pay a notary for their screw-up. Yeah, no, I don't think so. So now they have a car they put $10,000 into that they needed to sell fast because the value just keeps dropping. Soon it will be worth less than they paid for it. And it will just sit there forever because redacted is nothing but a building full of rude jerks. The next one is titled, "I took away his ride for messing with mine." Halloween 2012. It was around 2 a.m. and I had just arrived back home from a neighborhood party. As I walked towards my house and the porch light came on, I couldn't help but notice that the left side of my car was completely covered in egg. All over the window, all over the door, all down the front windscreen and underneath the window wipers too. I was naturally infuriated, but it was Halloween after all, I had just gotten unlucky. I grabbed a kitchen roll from the house and proceeded to spend 15 minutes trying to get egg off of my car in the dark. After thinking I had finally succeeded, I decided to sit in the car with a cigarette on the driveway, and call my friend. This is where it begins. As I was sat there, I could see through the rear view mirror a car going past my house, slowing down, turning around and driving past again. It must have happened 4 to 5 times. What if these were the people who had egged my car? I thought. I explained to my friend I needed to go, put the phone down and continued to watch this car acting really strangely on the road out front, until finally it stopped, 2 meters in front of my driveway. The engine went off, and through the darkness I could make out a tall hooded figure slowly depart from his crap mobile and walk up to the rear of my car. He was checking around him, and looking in the direction of the house, before he crouched down behind my car and went out of sight. Was this the guy who had vandalized my car? What's he up to now? Without hesitation I launched myself out of the driver's seat and charged around the side of my driveway. He was obviously not expecting that, as he bolted away from the house and his car down the street in a record-beating sprint. I looked down and saw 2 massive rockets, fireworks, stuffed into my car's exhaust, which he was about to light whilst I was sat in the car. By this time he was well out of sight, so I walked up to his car. He had left the window down on the driver's side. I put my head through and saw 2 sheepish chaps sitting there silently, staring at me in complete horror, and to my surprise, his car keys were still in the ignition. I quickly yanked them out and walked back into my house. I had taken his car as prisoner on my driveway. Without hesitation I was on the phone to the police. They said they were on the way and wanted to know where this guy was. by this time he had come back to the house and began banging on the front door, shouting threats and demanding his keys back. Then the flashing lights came. I stood there holding his keys whilst he was swiftly arrested for attempted arson and vandalism. Halloween was complete. I still have no idea who he was or why he was targeting me. I did get a thank you from the police because he was known to them though. The car was removed first thing in the morning, and I assume his friends bailed out the car before the police came. The last one is titled, "Sink My Car, Now Pay for Two." I submerged my car on a flooded road outside my apartment complex a few years back. Didn't realize it was flooded, turned onto the street doing about 30 to 35 miles per hour and splish splash, I was taking a bath. The street was constructed in a U-shape, with there being a large bowl where the water gathered. Unfortunately, there was only a small storm drain on either side of the road. I documented the scene, took videos of that day and then videos a day or two later when it flooded again. Witnesses at the time told me they had lived in the area for years and it flooded every winter. I sued the county, provided them with ample evidence, the cost of repairs, the loss of value in the car, loss of wages as my only means of transportation was damaged for a few weeks, the cost of a rental car, and the cost of labor. They attempted to say that the streets were designed to withstand a 10-year flood, and as the day in question was heralded as the storm of the century for my region, they said it was an act of God. I quickly countered their claim with video evidence of the street flooding a few days later. I let them know that it was not as substantial as the day I wrecked my car, as the water had been almost covering about 1/3 of the fire hydrant you can see in the video. Children were literally swimming across the street. I won 80-some odd % of my claim. They didn't want to go to court over the issue as they would have to pay more lawyer fees than what they had already paid and could very well likely wind up paying a good portion of the claim anyway. Fast forward a few months, and it floods again. I see a guy in similar situation as mine. He drove into the water and ducked his car up. I jot down my phone number and my previous claim number, make him a copy of the form used to file suit against the county, and tell him the situation. I tell him to contact me to be a witness if things got that far. I let him know that I had contacted the transportation department hours ago and they never showed up. They didn't detour the road, they didn't close it due to flooding, they didn't open up the drains. They knew of the issue hours before he wrecked his car. A few months later, wouldn't you know it, the county repaired the road and added proper drainage. Thanks for listening.